Hey guys, Charles here. Let's talk about CPI today. The sad thing about CPI, at least for us, is there are not a lot of released CPI questions. Um, but it is tested very heavily. That's what's a bit surprising is the released exams. There's only three, but there's a number of FRQs, and there's only one GDP FRQ, but there's probably four or five FRQs, four that I know of, and I've got a couple other ones from different places that are younger than that. But there's four different FRQs for CPI. You should definitely do all of them to get a good sense of. We're going to do a couple of them just to make sure you understand what's going on. But I want to talk about this cheat sheet here. It was for use for people, but I think we can make this a little tighter. What's going on here? First of all, this is nominal and real and CPI kind of questions that kind of flow together, right? So you have to know a couple definitions. First of all, you have to know that nominal GDP is price times quantity. That's important to just know because they're going to give you something like this where they give you cars produced, they give you the price of cars. Now, this is 1 year. This is 2012 here. And what we see is there's two goods being produced. Cars, price and quantity. Tacos, price and quantity. To get the nominal GDP for that year, you've got to multiply those and then add them together. So price times quantity, pretty simple. Every so often, they're going to give you the real GDP, and they might give you a price index, or let's talk about that for a second too. The CPI is it's a consumer goods, all of the consumer goods added up, measured for inflation. Did the price of consumer goods go up overall, down, by what rate, etc.? It is called the consumer price index. Now, the other measure of inflation we have is called the deflator. This involves all goods and services in the economy, all goods and services. So two different definitions, but both of these things are what we call price indexes. They're just measures of inflation, right? This is just a measure of inflation. This is a broader measure of inflation. But recognize how they can do this. They could have said the CPI times real GDP divided by 100 equals nominal, or they could have said the deflator times. Doesn't matter the information they give us. These are two different things, but they're both price indexes or measure of inflations. So mathematically, we just use them as if they're the same thing. And just know that any of these can be substituted for each other. So this is the first formula I would want. I don't think I've used this one very often, but it is real GDP times the CPI. CPI. Divided by 100 will give you your nominal GDP. It's on there. We just flip it around. You could use it, sure. That one's not asked too much. This one right here, real GDP, is used quite a bit. So it is the quantity in that whatever year you're talking about. If we're talking about year two, it would be the quantity in year two times the prices in the base year. If it was year three, we were trying to find the real GDP, we would use quantity in year three times prices in the base year. The base year, they're going to tell you where your base year is, so don't get worried about that, right? So your real GDP, another good formula for real GDP is nominal GDP divided by the price index times 100. Now this one is very important. We have a couple of formulas that are stupidly important for CPI. One of them is nominal over real times 100 equals the CPI. You have to know it. They're not going to give you a formula sheet, so you have to have this in your head. We can flip this around to just say nominal over CPI times 100 equals real, right? So that's kind of what's going on here. We could have called it the CPI. We could have called it price index. We could have called it the deflator. Doesn't matter. They're all the same thing, right? Treated same way mathematically. So nominal over real time 100 is CPI, super important. Nominal over CPI times 100, can we get real? That's what's going on right here. Notice that It's called finding the deflator, the GDP deflator. Well, instead of CPI here, I could have wrote GDP deflator. I hope that makes sense. And it is confusing, so you have to write them out. Make sure you understand that they can flip in different words there and ask you what the deflator was. Anyway, do have a good idea of definition for consumer index. This is tested more heavily. I don't think I've ever seen a definition of the deflator, but a definition of the consumer price index, there's probably about 4 or 5 of those over past years. So you definitely want to make sure you know that it is like I called a market basket of goods. It is consumer goods, jewelry, makeup, jewelry, makeup, clothing, shelter, cars, those kinds of things are consumer goods, right? Your CPI measures just consumer goods. Those are what we mean by they're a particular group of goods. They are particular and that they're only consumer. They could also call it a specific set of goods. They are specific in that they're specifically consumer goods. And a market basket, that basket is just a basket of consumer goods. I hope that makes sense. It is a little confusing, but you have to say it a few times, write it out, make sure you've got it. And I would always write out market basket, specific, particular, and consumer goods all next to each other so that you know exactly what's going on there. All right. You do have to have a rate of change formula, growth rate, rate of inflation calculation. And this is just new minus old over old times 100, right? If you've done any kind of mathematical stuff, this should make sense to you and be pretty straightforward. There are some shortcomings to CPI, what we call biases, in that the CPI, and I'll just give you a quick example. If they say transportation costs are going to be 20%, or they said transportation costs have gone up by 20%, that's what our CPI would tell us, is that transportation costs have gone up by 20%. But if I still use the same bike that I was using in primary school to get to work, have I been hit by that 20% inflation rate that the CPI has talked about? No, absolutely not, right? The CPI can't tell whether we're substituting cheaper goods, right? So if you're substituting instead of, I don't know, much more people with transportation costs would include cars, et cetera, but if you're still biking to school or walking to work, then you're not hit by that. So the CPI has no idea that you're substituting. They can't measure that. They also can't tell about quality of changes. This is the two things were most likely been tested before, is substitution and no quality of changes. All they can tell you is that the transportation costs have gone up. They can't tell you that new cars have all kinds of new safety devices. They have video cameras out the back, out the front, that they can get satellite radio. I mean, they don't tell you any of that, right? All they can tell you is transportation costs have gone up. They can tell you CPI knows nothing about quality or substitution. New goods, I've never seen a question about that, but it just implies that there's new goods, so your purchasing power has increased. Don't worry too much about that one. I haven't seen it before. But these two I've seen. I've got a number of questions about those, so make sure you recognize and understand that relationship. All right, let's do these 3 real quick. Pretty straightforward. 32, the Consumer Price Index measures which of the following. So we're going to stop for a second. You stop it, find the right answer, we'll talk about it. Remember, CPI refers to consumer goods, a specific set of goods, a particular, or a market basket. All of this is just code that we know. This is the definition of CPI. So the answer is A. Change over time of the prices of a particular group, particular meaning consumer. Easy enough. We don't talk anything about wholesale. There's an index for wholesale goods, but we do nothing with that. So no whole good, no wholesale, and I don't know how to think about that. The Consumer Price Index is designed to measure. Go ahead, stop it. Find your right answer. All right, 41. Spending patterns of urban consumers? No, it's all consumers. Spending patterns of all consumers? I don't think it's the spending patterns, it's the prices, right? Of consumer goods, not patterns of consumers. I don't even know what that means. It's kind of like just thrown in there so that you might choose it. We know we don't talk about wholesale goods. Prices of all goods and services, that's the deflator. That is not the CPI. This is our CPI, a market basket of goods and services, meaning consumer goods only, CPI. Again, tricky, right? It's hard. Sometimes their language is really weird. This is a rate of change question, right? So we're just doing, they're telling us that in 1998, the CPI was 125. And at the year end of 1999, it was 131. Oops. Let's see if we can get rid of that. 131. So all you're doing here is the 1999 is your new. This is your old. So you would just do 131. Come on, Charles. 131. It's new minus old. New minus old, 125, over old, 125 times 100. So that's 6 over 125 times 100, yada, 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 4.8. It can't be 6%. Lots of people look at this and they go, oh, it must be 6. If it was 6 over 100, yeah, then it would be 6%. But since that 125 is larger than 100, it's got to be less. You probably could have done this by just looking at the relationship if you're a math guy or girl, right? You could have looked at the relationship and gone, okay, I understand. It can't be 120. These don't make any sense. It's not 100. So if it was 6 divided by 100 times 100, then it would be 6%. It's not 0. That's just stupid. Got to be 4.8. Again, it's sad. These are the only 3 I have, but we're going to do a couple FRQs here. You should do them all. This one has a little bit, 2021. Let's don't do that one. Let's do... make this a little bit bigger. All right. So this is like what we've had in the past. Take a look at read number A. All right. We're going to do this, and I do it like a child every time. We're going to do, they do tell us that 2009 is the base year. That's important for you to know what the base year is. And I'm going to do these the same way. I'm going to find nominal GDP for year 2009. Nominal GDP for year 2009. Knowing that 2009 is my base year. So it is just price times quantity for nominal GDP. So price times quantity, price times quantity. I think 12, 6 times, oh, why can't I do that in my head? 2 times 4 is 8, easy enough. 5 times 6 is 30. Is this 18? I don't know. Why can't I do that in my head? You'd think I'd be able to do that better, right? 6 times 2.5. You do have a calculator this year, 15. That's embarrassing. 15 it is, so 30, 45, and 8, 53. Is that right? 53? I think so. Now, since I know this is my base year, remember the formula was nominal minus inflation equals real. But if there's no inflation, nominal and real are the same thing. So what we understand is in the base year, there's no inflation. Those are the years we're starting with our numbers. So nominal and real are always the same thing in the base year. We could have also used the formula, and you should know the formula. It's nominal over real times 100. I'm doing CPI. Sorry, I just had a brain fart there. I kind of jumped into it. Understanding in the base year, nominal and real are always the same. Pretty simple. Our CPI, though, our consumer price, and remember, I could have called this just as easily a deflator. I could have also just called it a price index. All of those mean the same thing. Or mathematically, we're going to treat them the same. It's always 100 in the base year. That's what I was doing here. If you took 53, put it over 53, that gives you 1 times 100 equals 100. Your CPI, just know it, is always 100 in the base year, and it's going to save you a lot of times. You don't have to calculate it. You just know what it is. Now let's try to do 2010. I'm going to probably mess that up. It's basic math. 2.5 times 8, 16. I think that's 20. 10 times 10 is 100. 5 times 5 is 25. So 145. So we just did price times quantity for 2010. Prices and quantity, and we got our nominal GDP. Pretty straightforward and simple. Now, how do we find real GDP? We don't know the CPI. If we do, we could figure it out. We're going to do these the same way. I'm just going to change this color just a little bit to make it a little different here. When they're giving us this structure, we're going to take the quantity in our current year times the prices in the base year. And our current year is 2010. So we're going to take the quantity for 2010 times the prices of our base year. That's 8 times 2.5, which was 20. And then 6 times 2 is 60. 5 times 4 is 20. 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Our real GDP was 100. Easy enough. Now, to find the CPI, again, here's our formula up here. Nominal divided by real. I'm just going to write it out. Nominal divided by real times 100 equals our CPI. You should be able just to look at that and know it's going to give you 145. So our CPI in 2009 was 100. It went in 2010, it went to 145. We've had 45% inflation from one year to the next. They don't ask it a lot, but we need to know it. All right, nominal GDP for 2010, 145. We did it. 100 for real GDP. Here's one of your rate of change questions. 1 year, the price index. Now, they could have called it the CPI. They could have said deflator. I know I've said it a lot, but you have to get it in your head. In the next year, it was 55. What is the rate of inflation? So it is just new minus old over old times 100. So 55 minus 50, which is 5 over 50 times 100. I'm going to do it in the calculator. It's 10%. How could I have done this slightly different, which I like better than doing this? If I take 50 and multiply it by 2, it gives me 100. If I take 55 and multiply it by 2 again, it gives me 110. I went from 100 to 1. That's 10%. Right? Recognize that if you're ever at 100, and the next number would be 45. If 145, you went 45%. If I went from 100 to 110, it's 10%. But I can't go from 110 to 115 and then call that a 5%. It won't work because the new was 115 over, minus the old, 110. I did that badly, didn't I? 5 out of 110. That's definitely 4 point something. I don't know what it is. But recognize that anytime we start at 100 and there's enough of these questions that you just kind of have to know it, it makes it simpler. And the next number you go to, that's easy. If I go from 100 to 150, that was a 50% increase. I go from 100 to 135, that's a 35% increase. But if I go from 135 to 140, that's not a 5% increase because it's 5 out of 135. Anyway, you math guys can do that better than me. Just make sure we understand that, and we'll be pretty good. All right, we're going to skip these. This is, let's don't skip C, because this formula we already know. Go ahead and read C. I'm going to take a break. Stop it. All right. Assume the next year's wage rate will be 3% higher than this year's because of inflationary expectations. The actual inflation rate is 4. At the beginning of next year, will the real wages be higher? So we already have this information in our head, how to do it, but we need to see it again. The formula is nominal minus inflation equals real. That looks familiar, doesn't it? But this can be GDP, this can be wages, this can be interest rates. If we're talking about percentages, it works perfectly fine. Your nominal wage is going to go up by 3%. But inflation, you're getting a higher wage next year. Woo, happy. But inflation, the price of everything, is going to go up by 4%. Your real wage just fell by 1%. And the real wage is what you could actually buy with your money, what you could actually put in the shopping cart. That looks more like a child's bucket. But anyway, the idea there is you have to recognize that if your wages go up, but inflation goes up higher than your nominal wage, your real wage is going to go down, right? This is just that relationship that we just kind of have to know. All right, we're going to leave that. We're not going to work on inflationary stuff. We'll do those when we see inflation. All right, let's look at this one real quickly, see if we can do it. I don't want to spend too much, but again, they've given us quantity, they've given us prices, and they're asking us for nominal GDP. You would do the 400 times the 6, the 1,000 times the 2, and the 800 times the 2, and we're just going to jump to it. It would give you 6,000, right? B, assume that Galen, the deflator, or the price index, or the CPI, is 100 in the base year and 150 this year. Calculate the inflation rate. So this is just a rate of change, right? New minus old, over old, times 100. So the new is 150, old is 100. That gives us 50 over 100 times 100. So this is simply, we could have also just looked at that. If you go from 100 to 150, it's got to be a 50% rate of inflation change. But this one's nice. They're asking us what's happening to real GDP. Now, we've got nominal and we've got our CPI for this year. Again, we should know nominal over real times 100 equals our CPI. Or we can flip that around and say nominal over the CPI times 100 equals real. So we've got the 6,000, we got the CPI of 150, and times 100 will give us 4,000. I just know it because I've done it a lot. But you should do the math and make sure that it works for you and that you can do that on your calculator with no problem. And recognize the CPI is not the 50% increase from one year to the next. It is the 150, right? So you have to recognize that your CPI is that 150 there. That's where some people get confused. All right, we'll do C. Since the base year workers have received a 20% increase in nominal wages, if workers face the same inflation that you calculated in BI, which was 50%, what happened to their real wages? Again, nominal wages minus nominal minus inflation, or price level changes, equals real wages. And they got a raise of 20%, but the price of everything went up by 50%. They lost. What they can actually buy is 30% less amount of stuff. Their real wages went definitely down. All right, we're going to stop there. You can find all of these by just going to the College Board website and working your way through them. Or you can find them on my website, cheat sheets. All right, be safe. Take care. Good job today.